Two former Canadian envoys to China say they have received calls from Global Affairs about their public statements on China. The Globe and Mail first reported that David Mulroney was contacted by an assistant deputy minister. Then former Ambassador Guy Saint-Jacques confirmed to Power in Politics that he was also contacted. Mulroney claims the message was communicated that the Prime Minister's office wants him to check in with Foreign Affairs before speaking publicly about the Canada-China issue. Saint-Jacques says his call focused on everyone speaking with one voice about China. At the center of the Canada-China standoff is the detention of two Canadians. But Mulroney tells the Globe the message he got also alluded to the current election environment. Mulroney says he refused to comply with the request. So what should we make of this? Time for the Power Panel. In Calgary, Marcella Monroe of KTG Public Affairs. Amanda Alvaro of Pomp and Circumstance joins us from Toronto. And here with me in studio, Summa Strategies, Tim Powers. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Marcella, I'm going to start with you. What do you make of it?
Well, obviously there's been another fumble from the PMO, but, I think the first things first, before we all start, getting hyper over-analytical about this, which we're about to do, it's not uncommon for national governments to keep in touch with former diplomats, with people who are engaged in a serious way with countries with which they're having disputes. They do this both as another avenue to collect information and also to share information in the hopes that you get to a common public message. So I think that part of it's normal. I think all federal governments in history have done it on various occasions. I don't think it's that unusual. I think there's a problem here for the Liberal government, a few problems on this. One of them is I think when you're going to have a sensitive conversation like that with someone who's as respected and has been as outspoken as Mr. Mulroney has on this question, I think it's better that conversation has to be at a very high level. In other words, I think if they felt they needed to reach out and have this discussion, it needs to be done very carefully, and I think it needs to be done by a senior person. Probably the minister herself should have made those calls. There's no question, in my view, as well, that we're having daily, we have almost a weekly debate about the situation with China and whether it's being handled properly. And I don't think we've seen a significant shift from the federal government. And so people, again, like Mr. Mulroney, who, again, is a very serious individual who's been following Chinese relations with Canada for a very long time. He has been outspoken on this file, sure, but I think we're all very concerned about these Canadians whose lives are at risk. And I think it is good to have that healthy public discussion. But I think it's unfortunate that voices, like Mr. McCallum or Mr. Chrétien are kind of seen to be, who I think have been a bit controversial, kind of get a pass from the federal government, and Mr. Mulroney is getting these kind of phone calls. So I think it's just a bit of a bungle.
It's interesting, Amanda, because I think at the bottom of the Globe's article, Mr. Mulroney is sort of quoted as saying, I don't want to say directly, but saying something to the effect of, you think I'm the problem? Like, what about John McCallum and Jean Chrétien? And to be fair, we've asked the Prime Minister's office, I believe one of my producers has, if they have, or if they have contacted, I'm sure, I don't know if the discussions with John Chrétien or John McCallum have gone on, but they haven't become public like these have. And that does, on the face of it, present a problem.
On the face of it, yes, but I would imagine that some of those conversations have taken place. We know that some of the comments from some of the former diplomats have been controversial, and I think that there's likely been discussions about that as well. I think Marcella makes a lot of really good points. The reality is, from a communications perspective, this is a highly sensitive, high stakes issue that's at play right now. And I think if there was any communication coming from the PMO, it was likely around the areas of like unified messaging and making sure that whatever is put out into the stratosphere, which is consumed by, Chinese leadership as well, is a unified message from Canada. I think that there's another issue at play, and that's around Canadian travelers and where they're seeking their information and knowing that there's one place that they should go to get that. So I don't think that there was anything nefarious going on. I just think that when we're dealing with these lives, these detainees, families who are in the most traumatic situation, and making sure that if we're going to be speaking, and you're going to be speaking as an official or a former official, somebody who's well respected, former official, somebody who's well respected and often quoted in media, and that media is being consumed by other nations. Probably there's some important, there's the responsibility on the part of the government to make sure, A, that those former diplomats are well informed, that they know where the circumstances is at.
That's fair, but to inform them, to make sure they're apprised of the latest is one thing. To have them speak with one voice, like when I request an ex-ambassador, I am not assuming that he is answering questions on behalf of the government of Canada and speaking with the same voice as them. And often, actually, we're asking for them because nobody from the government will talk about this issue at all. That's my only question mark.
I'd add three things to this. One, what we are seeing, if we believe, and we have no reason to disbelieve what Mr. Mulroney and Mr. St. Jacques are saying, is a frustration that the government is having about this file writ large. Clearly, they're reaching out to people they believe who are credible spokespeople who may have a different view and saying, look, we would like if you spoke in a unified tone, that would help us. So there's a frustration that is obvious. The second point, though, was the outreach was tremendously clumsy. I think if you've watched David Mulroney on your program or Guy Saint-Jacques and followed them, you could probably take from them that they weren't going to be people, particularly Mr. Mulroney, who were swayed by domestic political calculations, if that is in fact what was said to him. And in fact, what
I should point out, to be fair, Mr. St. Jacques said that was not said to him.
Okay,
right? So
correct.
Mr. Mulroney was the only one to say that the election was raised.
But these individuals now view themselves, and rightly so, as independent commentators with an expertise. So, you probably should have been wiser. As Marcella said, if you wanted to do this, you could make the Do It for the Nation call by Minister Freeland or even the Prime Minister himself. I think that would have been more well regarded. The third point, who wins in all of this? The Chinese. Because again, we're talking about Canadians having different points of view, well-respected Canadians. It reflects on the frustration, as I said earlier, that the government has. There's a disjointed approach. The Chinese have to be happy now that, look, Canada can't even agree, is how it will be framed, though that is not fair, but that's how I'm sure they will frame it, on how they want to deal with us. This Prime Minister doesn't have the control that he should. That's what propagandists will do. So that's the misfire with the miscalculation about the outreach.
Yeah, again, Marcella, I get the wanting to be informed.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. Like you said, like calls among ex-diplomats, they should know, they shouldn't be privy to that. The big question mark for me is just the idea that they should be speaking with one voice. And I also get the concern about negatively impacting those two detained Canadians. I just don't think that especially in the case of these two individuals, who I've interviewed many times on this topic, they have not been overly critical, actually, of the government's position. No. Many times they support it. They're the ones saying Christopher Freeland is saying the right thing when she says the rule of law applies here.
Yeah, so, we also had Stockwell Day putting a photo online showing off him hanging out with the CEO of Huawei this week. So, very prominent former Conservative politician. So there's a lot of different signals coming out of Canada.
Very true.
Listen, so I think in my view, again, I would hearken back to the actually very good job the Canadian government did around NAFTA.
Yeah, that's a good model.
There was a case where they brought together disparate views on this very important question of the country. They got their input and came to a kind of more or less a consensus view. There were still there were big personalities on that committee, people from Rona Ambrose to my business partner Brian Topp and all the way in between, who would still have different things to say, but they could be confident that they had the information to have a bit more of a unified and subtle view when they talk to the public. I think that could be possible still for the government of Canada in this, but the first step is they need to be willing to have that kind of a come together moment to get people on the same page, at least where the facts are known. I think a lot of this has been caused, and I've said this previously on the show, a lot of this has been caused because so few of us understand exactly what the strategy is here for the federal government in dealing with this. It seems very kind of make it up at the minute. And even if it's not, because we know it's a sensitive diplomatic issue, I think they need to broaden the tent of who's in the tent. And at least then, if people are having different opinions come out, they're better informed opinions, and maybe they're more sensitive to some of the key questions.
Quick final word to Amanda. I got to take a commercial break. Amanda?
Well, and that may very well have been the impetus for some of these phone calls, is to take experts, people who are sought after by media which is consumed obviously by Chinese leadership, and make sure that they have all of the information, and hopefully that we're singing from somewhat of the same song sheet, because at the end of the day, there's nothing partisan about making sure that we get those Canadians back on Canadian soil.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.